morning, Matthew. For FAD Juventud, it is a privilege to have you today in an event that we already discussed many things about technology, risk and possibilities of this technology for children and teenagers. We talk about responsibility for families, teachers, regulators, and also the industry. Although perhaps a lot of people know you, let me introduce yourself a bit. Matthew Griffin is the CEO and Futurist in Chief of the 311 Institute, a keynote speaker and 30 times author, and one of the world's leading authority on emerging technologies, trends, future, and deep future. As he likes to be introduced, a person who wants to see the future and technology will affect our children. Thank you very much for being with us today.
That's a pleasure. Thank you very much as well.
First of all, let me ask you, when I was thinking on how to introduce yourself, it was curious to see you define yourself as a futurist. What do you mean with that?
Yeah, so a futurist is somebody that tries to investigate lots of different points of information, signals, trends, technologies, all these different things, and then tries to understand how these could actually affect the future, and then how we can also affect those simultaneously trends and technologies to shape our own future as well. So in my case, I follow over 600 emerging technologies, 250 global megatrends, and I span up to 50 years out. And really, the future is quite literally, certainly from our children's perspective, infinite. So it keeps me busy.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. It's I think we may need a lot of futurists then in the future and now. Yeah. Watching a recent interview of yours, you spoke about that giving access to internet is giving like a unlimited power. Yeah. How can our children manage this power, and how, as parents, can train them or can prepare them to handle this power?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I often talk about technology being an enabler and being used to help unlock almost limitless human potential. Now, what I mean by that is, if we have a look at this from our children's perspective, there are three questions that really none of us have ever been asked before. And those are, what would you do if the only things you had access to was all of the world's knowledge? So Google democratized access to information. If we combine, should we say, the internet with artificial intelligence, then we start creating knowledge from that information, which we all have access to. And then what would you do if you had access as a child to all of the world's skills? Okay, so as we think of artificial intelligence automating different jobs and tasks, the fact of the matter is that if you put a good interface over the top of those artificial intelligences, you can democratize access to those jobs and tasks for all of us. So giving you an example, today, basically, if you haven't learned how to program or code, increasingly, you can use an artificial intelligence to develop software for you. If you never went to law school, you can get an artificial intelligence to create an NDA contract for you, etc., etc. So as artificial intelligence automates different jobs and tasks, it gives us all access to those skills. And then the third thing, what would you do if the only thing that you could do was in the morning create a product or have an idea, and by the end of the day, have that in front of 4 billion connected people? So when we actually have a look at the world that really our children see as the status quo, they have access to all the world's knowledge, increasingly all the world's skills, and then they have the ability to create products, businesses, generate ideas and share ideas, etc., at global scale faster than anyone has ever done in the past. And so on the one hand, when we have a look at technology, technology is this huge enabler. And from our children's perspective, as well as our own perspectives, what we do with this power is quite tricky to understand, because traditional education teaches us in a traditional way. We are taught to be T-shaped individuals. But if you have almost limitless potential as an individual, what do you want to do with it? Which is where I often refer to the Japanese ikigai. You know, what is your first thing, what is your purpose as an individual? What do you want to achieve? What motivates you? What does the world need that you have in terms of sort of earning money and having a job? And when we have a look at how technology is increasingly shaping our future, we fundamentally need to think about our own futures in a brand new way. And so we have great power with technology, but then on the flip side, those same technologies that give us this power and help us achieve these great things in record speeds also have downsides when we have a look at the online, the digital, the virtual worlds. And, I'm sure we can discuss those.
Yeah, in fact, it's kind of scary on one side, but also a challenge.
Yeah.
And you talk about traditional education. Do you think in the schools are teaching what is necessary? Yeah. What is the first step? What are the following ones? Can you talk about what is going to happen at schools, or what should happen at schools?
No, absolutely. It's a great question. So when we have a look at the national curriculums of most countries, the national curriculums were set really about 100 years ago. What we teach, how we teach it, really hasn't changed in 100 years. It has been adapted, but not very much. So on the one hand, when we have a look at the national curriculums and their suitability for the future, the gap between what we are teaching children in class and just their real world every day is getting wider. So there's one student recently put it to me. They said, why does school teach us about the past, but not the present or the future? And if you think about that, when you have a look at most curriculums are very light when it comes to just computing, let alone any of the other technologies that we're being exposed to, like artificial intelligence or 3D printing or virtual reality, augmented reality, Web3, blockchain, crypto, all these kinds of things. So what we're seeing from employers is we're increasingly seeing the vast majority of employers saying that they are now looking to hire children and students out of school that have superb soft skills, those communication skills, resourcefulness, empathy, the ability to collaborate with not just other children or other adults, but also machines, entrepreneurship, these kinds of things, curiosity. And the reason why more organizations are saying that they are hiring predominantly based on soft skills is because as artificial intelligence automates hard skills faster and faster, as I alluded to earlier, increasingly the half-life of a hard skill now seems to be about 5 years. So organizations are saying, we will take people based on their soft skills. And if they don't have, should we say, the right hard skills, because they were never taught how to build virtual reality worlds or evolving robots or artificial intelligence models or data science or cyber or whatever it happens to be, then those companies will provide them with the nano degrees and the training to close that gap. So this is, and again, when we have a look at the education system, again, sort of swinging it back online, the vast majority of children that I teach, and I teach children from about the age of 8 all the way through to university, graduate level, the fact is, they are being increasingly trained on new topics, new things that they're interested in via informal education, which are things like edX, Coursera, Udacity, YouTube, and so on and so forth. So when we have a look at trying to prepare children for the future, you have formal education, which is increasingly falling behind where it needs to be in terms of providing children with the valuable skills that they need today, let alone in 2030 or 2035 when the children go into the workforce. And that's increasingly being augmented by informal education. And really, from an education perspective, I think the best solution sits somewhere in the middle, as well as updating the national curriculums, which is a whole conversation in itself. So, which we've been trying to do globally, by the way, and having some success.
Yeah, in fact, it's a great conversation, but I don't know if teachers are really prepared for that, at least for the soft skills, the development of soft skills that you were talking about. I think they are, but talking about the present and the future instead of the past, it is another question somehow, because as you said, it's not what they are used to.
No, absolutely. And one of the biggest issues that we have is if you do try to change the national curriculums, then you also have to teach the teacher. And we do have a number of ways to do that. But when you have a look, for example, at the role that technology plays in everyone's lives now, I often argue that the majority of companies on the planet now are actually technology companies. You know, if you have a look at Ford, you know, the motor car company, they're increasingly a technology company. If you have a look at companies like Airbus, they're a technology company. If you have a look at companies like Pfizer or Maersk, they're a technology company really by heart. Even when you have a look at banks, increasingly, are you a bank that uses technology? Or are you a technology company, you know, with all your giant data centers and applications and services that provides financial services? And increasingly, we're all becoming tech organizations. And, you know, when you do have a look at education, computing and technology as disciplines and fields, they're relegated almost to the back of the classroom.
Let me change completely the topic. You talk about how the companies use algorithms to marketing people and to do a lot of things. So what do you think are the limits on that?
There are no limits. So I'll explain. As much as we would actually, so if we're talking about the technological limits and our ability to put constraints on how algorithms pull our data from us and then use that to create hyper-personalized, for example, advertising campaigns, marketing content, whatever it happens to be. Now, if you have a look at, for example, Facebook draws about 5,000 different data points from us as individuals. It then combines those data points together and creates a personal profile on each and every one of us that is more detailed than any of our friends know about. You know, so yeah, Facebook can understand where you live, how much you earn because of the car that you drive, your friendship circles, your levels of education, because they can actually listen to your voice. They can listen to how you speak, the words that you use. They can tell your health, basically, from whether or not your face is flushing. So there's a lot of biomarker and biometric data that organizations can draw as well. The angle that you hold your phone at, which is measured by the accelerometers in the phones, indicates whether you are depressed or not. I can tell from your voice whether you have dementia or whether you have PTSD, etc., etc. So when we have a look at the large social media platforms' ability to, on the one hand, capture data, and it's not just online data, it can be offline data as well from the real world, and then combine that together to create hyper-personalized profiles of us all, to the point that they know us better than we probably know ourselves, there isn't any limit on that. I mean, even from this call, you can use this camera that I'm talking to now, combined with artificial intelligence, to detect from my irises whether or not I'm lying with a 99% level of accuracy. Just from my face, we have artificial intelligences out of Israel and China that can detect your character, your personality and behavior traits. We even have artificial intelligences out of China that are able to, from your face, just a photo, tell your intent to criminality. So in other words, whether or not you are likely to become a criminal. So when we think about the data that we're actually sharing, it's not just the data that we think. It's not what we're typing into these platforms or who we're interacting with or the products that we are clicking on or showing off. There is so much more information that these platforms are collecting and can collect than anyone can imagine. And we're only just scratching the surface on that.
Well, that's a bit, I don't know if scary or futurist or science fiction, but let me talk about something that maybe the people that is listening to us is closer.
Yeah.
We talk about critical thinking of kind of the best way to tackle everything or to work on this. Yeah. But I listened to you talking about the echo chambers in social networks,
yeah,
and the risk of pose this critical capacity somehow. Yeah. How we can really change that situation or try to make bigger our capacity for critical thinking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when we have a look at echo chambers, it's relatively well documented that it is very easy for algorithms, without pointing fingers, but it is very easy for algorithms to push us all into different echo chambers. So if I'm engaging with a particular kind of content, then the algorithm will push me more of that content, whether or not I clicked on that content by accident. So eventually I end up in an echo chamber. And those echo chambers, I mean, we all know them. Those echo chambers end up being filled with people who we think are like us. Those echo chambers start being responsible for changing our outlook on life, how we think about the world, our own opinions and beliefs get changed. Now, when we have a look at certain platforms, it's been measured that on certain platforms, the fact that you are pushed into an echo chamber increases the level of engagement by at least 5-fold. Okay, so it's actually, we can argue through this, etc., and the social media platforms do. If they are measuring their revenues based on engagement, how long you stay on the platforms, when we have a look at TikTok is going to longer form video because they want you to stay on the platform for longer, these sorts of things. Then inevitably there is an interest from the social media giants to get you into an echo chamber and to show you particular kinds of content. Now, there are lots of debates in the Senate, in Congress, as well as in Brussels, in the European Union and elsewhere, on how we can get people out of these echo chambers, and shouldn't we regulate against echo chambers? Shouldn't the social media networks do more to try to break us out of particularly extremist echo chambers? And I've seen I've seen a number of studies and experiments, for example, from universities in Norway, as well as just a couple basically over in the United States, that have actually found that if someone, for example, is now in a far right or an extremist echo chamber, if you modify their feed to show them alternative viewpoints, so you still show them the content that they've kind of come to see, but you drip feed other kinds of content into those feeds, maybe it's, liberal content or far left content, whatever we'll sort of want to put in. Those people's views actually change. They become less polarized. So when we actually think about what's happening online, we all know that society is becoming increasingly polarized. It's becoming increasingly polarized because we are in echo chambers. And because we're in these echo chambers, children are increasingly, whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Europe, are increasingly afraid to talk to one another about their different viewpoints because they don't like conflict. So when we actually have a look at breaking the echo chambers, we've had the solution to that for years, but it's just not been implemented. And then on the one hand, we can question why, and then on the other hand, we can go and mention that to the regulators and see what they make of it.
These are very related to my last two questions. One is, of course, if as parents we provide diverse content to our children, that will be better just to develop this critical thinking and avoid these echo chambers somehow and the effect that you mentioned before. But what other role the parents have to provide digital socialization for our children, promoting digital skills and encourage a healthy online behavior?
That's a great question. So parents play a pivotal role. However, they aren't the only ones to play a role. So firstly, when we have a look at online, when we're talking about child safety, we often talk in terms of children being safe on the internet. However, realistically, we've got the internet. We could also argue that social media isn't the internet. We've also then got online games, which isn't really the internet. So I think we have a little bit of a messaging issue around that. And then we also increasingly have virtual reality worlds and different sort of immersive realities that are coming through. So the first thing from a parent's perspective to think about is, don't just think about online safety as how your children behave and act on the internet, because it's not. Really, we're talking about how they act and behave and how they interact with anything that is behind a screen, whether it's a virtual reality world in Fortnite, a gig maybe, or whether it's a social media platform, or whether it's a website or an online IRC platform, so on and so forth. So with that covered, the general advice is children should not trust anyone online, and that is both human and artificial intelligence, because increasingly when they're talking to different entities online, if you have a look, for example, in some of the game platforms, how do you know that you're talking to a human any longer? How do you know that it's not an artificial intelligence? So trust no one, whether it's human or artificial intelligence, but also trust nothing, because increasingly as artificial intelligence is able to help us as humans create new kinds of content in new ways, fake news, misinformation, disinformation is everywhere. So then we sort of come to the circle of trust, because if children are consuming and engaging with content online or behind the glass, then if they see anything they are unsure of, they have to have a circle of trust that they can go to. Now, the circle of trust can be parents, but that can also be teachers. But also we have to admit that children's circle of trust also includes their friends. If children are seeing something online, like my kids, they will see something online and they go, this is definitely real. And I'll say, it's definitely not. And then they'll go and ask their friends and say, do you think this is real? So it's very important that children have a circle of trust that includes parents. Now, from a parent perspective, I also encourage parents to be inquisitive. It's far too common that we just let our children loose on their devices. But as parents, we don't really know what they're doing, who they're talking to, what they're interacting with. We don't know if they've seen things that they shouldn't have or that are harmful. We aren't quizzing them. So parents have to take a more active role in engaging with their children, even if it's just to say, you know, what have you been doing? Did you see something that you've got questions about, or whatever it happens to be? And then when we actually have a look from a child's perspective, they need to increasingly be able to have a way to independently verify the things that they're seeing. And again, when we have a look at institutions, say, for example, the news, we're starting to see trust in institutions breaking down, partly because of misinformation, disinformation, polarization, echo chambers, and so on and so forth. So children have to have a way to be able to verify what they see online, but they also have to have critical thinking. And I encourage my children to actually not trust anything that they see online, just as the sort of common status quo. When we have a look at the cybersecurity industry, just to sort of give you a random example, because of the rise of different technologies in the cybersecurity industry, we talk about having to have a zero trust policy first. So that's where children should come from. And again, you know, when children are online, from a parent perspective, it's very important that parents help children boost their own self-esteem, because there is a lot of content, whether it's harmful or not, there's a lot of content online that can drag a child's self-esteem and confidence down. However, if children are confident in themselves, if they have high levels of self-esteem, we've seen with children that really whatever happens online, whether they are bullied online, whether they are exposed to things that they shouldn't be exposed to online, whether they're being exposed to just subtle behavioral cues, because we also see a lot of people, but also increasingly artificial intelligences that are trying to manipulate us all, not just children. Children that have high levels of self-esteem are much more likely to be mentally resilient in the face of everything that the internet has to throw at them. And then, you know, from again, sort of bringing it back to parents, you know, children have to know that it is okay to turn this stuff off. Yeah. How many times do we really say to children, by the way, as you're scrolling through, it's okay to turn it off. It's okay to disengage. In fact, it's a good thing to disengage. You know, not always, because technology plays a central role in children's lives, both now and in the decades that they have to come. And children also need to be encouraged to engage with their real life local communities. You know, we sort of talked about a little bit sort of the other day of what happens basically when you actually do come off the screen, when you turn it off. You know, if governments just suddenly turned off TikTok like we saw in India, or we might see in America, does that leave children feeling isolated and lonely? On the one hand, it can, but if they have the support of their local community and the people who are in their circle of trust, they don't feel lonely. You know, so there are all these different things basically that we can do to encourage our children to be more independent when it comes to being online, to monitor themselves when they're online, but also there are different things that we can do to ensure that they have the critical skills and thinking that they need, but also the support that they need offline, so that their mental health over time doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, very, very useful. I think Yeah, another way to rephrase the trust is like a question everything and ask questions, both children and parents.
Yeah.
So let me ask you the last question, and it's related with regulation.
Yeah.
You know about regulation in different countries. Do you feel like there is a country where can be best practice in terms of, because here in Spain right now we are talking about, there is a lot of debate on regulation and prohibiting or things or not. What do you think what is the best way to regulate all these things?
So when we're talking about regulation, there's quite a lot. So I work with a lot of regulators around the world. Now, if we have a look at the European Union, the other day, the European Union finally ratified the Artificial Intelligence Act. Now, it was a significant moment in time. Everybody hailed it as a great sort of almost world first success. But the fact of the matter is that artificial intelligence has been building up in terms of capability for the past 20 years. Why is this the first time we have an AI Act? And the AI Act was actually sort of steered through by one of my old bosses, Thierry Breton, as you do. Now, when we have a look at technology, we can all see with our very own eyes that the rate of technological development is almost science fiction-like. You know, we see this with the new artificial intelligence models that are coming through every day. You know, when we have a look to the year 2028, it's estimated that we will have artificial intelligences, AI, general intelligences that have IQs of 1600, that contain 1 billion times more knowledge and information than any human. So technology is this rocket ship in terms of how quickly it's developing. And when we have a look at regulators, by comparison, regulators are the people on a bike with a puncture trying to keep up with it. Now, the regulators that I work with, and I work with global regulators, say, we aren't technologists. We are lawyers and policy wonks. But on the one hand, the problem that regulators have is, if we take, for example, artificial intelligence, if you created the perfect artificial intelligence regulation today, then by tomorrow, AI would be able to do something else that you hadn't thought of. So that regulation is weakened. So on the one hand, regulators have to get out more. They have to be technologists first. They have to understand the development trajectory of these different technologies and understand where these technologies could be in 5 years' time, and then they regulate ahead of time. And we see that in China. China was ahead of the curve when it came to regulating generative artificial intelligence as well as deepfakes. So on the one hand, regulators have to engage with tech communities and actually futurists like myself. That's it. It sounds like a plug, but there is content behind that, trust me. So they have to engage with people, and they have to understand the nature of the technologies that they are trying to regulate and what they can be used for, not just today, but also in the future, so that they can draft the right questions, they can draft the right policies today, so that when these technologies get to the future, we have a ready set of regulations. And then secondly, when we actually have a look at regulators, standing up regulatory sandboxes is an excellent idea. Yeah. So, for example, in the Middle East, we will have a lot of regulators who sit over the shoulders of people who are building the latest technologies, that can do the latest things. And they will say, they have the opportunity to say, what are you making? And the startups will say, well, I'm making this. And the regulators can say, well, why? What does it do? You know, what are the good things that it could do? But also, how could it? What are the downsides? So by bringing them together, we can do new things. But fundamentally, regulators have one of the greatest challenges because technology is developing so quickly. And increasingly, when we have a look at the regulation of artificial intelligence, we increasingly think that the only way to create regulations that can keep up with the rate of change is to use artificial intelligence to help draft the policies. Which,
yeah, in fact,
yeah.
But can also support them, and also they can go to the industry to understand better the technology somehow, as you were saying.
Well, so on that, so for example, if regulators go to the companies that are if regulators only go to the companies that are making the products, then the companies making the products say, you know what, everything's fine. Our technology cannot be used to harm anyone. We see that time and time again with OpenAI and the statements that they keep making to the press. However, regulators have to go to a diverse range of individuals, organizations, and people from across sector, but also different generations, to get as large a view as they can of these different technologies, because it's only by having that sort of 360-degree view of these technologies that you can then truly understand what they're capable of. So I remember working with the European Union a number of years ago on trying to develop regulations to police deepfake technology, and the regulators at that point were already 4 years behind what the technology could already do.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. However, you know, the regulators are there to apply the brakes, as much as people don't like that. They are there to ensure safety. They are there to minimize the downsides and the harm. And if we have a look, for example, bringing it back to children online, why haven't the regulators dictated that you have to tell someone if they're talking to an artificial intelligence bot? Why are the regulators not demanding and stipulating and writing into policy and law that if you post manipulated content or artificially intelligence generated content, it has to be flagged? Those are straightforward, simple regulations to put in that, while not everyone will follow them, still give our children a better measure of protection than they have today.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, we come to the end. It was a real pleasure to listen to you. It was a very inspirational ideas and thoughts, maybe advanced also an expert one. So thank you very much for being with us today. And we will continue to talk to you in the future about all this future somehow.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for inviting me again. It's been lovely to be here.
Yeah, for sure we will. Thank you very much.
You take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Chicos, ¿estamos?